Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I've driven through a lot of nowhere towns in my years behind the wheel. You get a feel for them after a while. The ones that are just passing through their own slow death. The diners still open out of stubbornness. The gas stations with pumps that look like they were installed when gas cost pennies. Marin's Hollow was that kind of town. Maybe worse. I wasn't supposed to stop there at all. My route had me cutting through the eastern part of the state on my way to a distribution hub about 4 hours out, and Marin's Hollow was one of those blink and miss it places that barely registered on the map. But my truck had other ideas. Something in the engine started complaining loud enough that I wasn't comfortable pushing it, and by the time I nursed it off the highway and into town, it was well past dark and I had no real options. There was a mechanic shop on the main road, closed for the night, a diner that looked like it might open in the morning, and at the far end of the street, set back from everything else like it was trying to keep its distance, there was a hotel called the Varden. It was a big old building, 3 stories, painted a color that had probably been white at some point, but it settled into something closer to old bone. The sign out front was lit, barely, with a couple letters flickering. There were a few lights on inside. I sat in my truck for a minute looking at it, and I can't tell you exactly why I hesitated. It wasn't anything I could point to. It just had the feeling of a place that had been waiting. But I was tired, and I didn't have a better option, so I grabbed my bag and went inside. The lobby was clean enough. Old furniture, a front desk made of dark wood, a chandelier overhead that worked, but gave off a yellowish light that made everything look like a photograph. There were framed pictures on the walls, landscapes mostly, a few portraits. I glanced at them and moved on. The man behind the desk was already looking at me when I walked in, like he'd known I was coming. He was tall, thin, wearing a dark suit that looked too formal for the job. His face was smooth and pale, and his hair was combed back neatly. He smiled when I approached, and it was a perfectly reasonable smile. Nothing wrong with it on the surface. His name tag said Harlan. He didn't ask for a card or ID. He just asked how many nights. I said just the one, and he set a key on the counter. Room 12, second floor. He told me checkout was at 11, told me the vending machines were down the hall, and wished me a pleasant stay in a voice like he was reading from a script he'd memorized a long time ago. I took the key and went upstairs. The room was fine. It felt a little preserved, like someone had set it up carefully and then sealed it off. The bedspread was an older style. The lamp on the nightstand had a pull chain. The TV was smaller than what you'd expect in a hotel these days. But the bed was made, and the room was quiet, and I was running on fumes. I didn't think much about any of it. I kicked off my boots, lay down, and that was it. When I woke up, the room looked the same. At first. The light coming through the curtains was early morning grey. I lay there for a second, getting my bearings, the way you do when you've slept somewhere unfamiliar. Then I noticed the TV. It was the same TV, but the brand logo on it was different. An older name I recognized from when I was a kid. The remote on the nightstand was bigger, chunkier, the kind with the big rubber buttons. I sat up. The bedspread was different too. Same general color, but a different pattern. And the picture on the wall across from the bed, which I could have sworn was a landscape the night before, was now a portrait of a woman in clothing that looked like it was from another era. I went to the window. The street below was not the street I'd driven down the night before. The buildings were mostly the same shapes, but different. The signs were different. There was a car parked at the curb that I recognized as a model from the late 80s, but it looked brand new. There was another one further down, same era. A man walked past on the sidewalk in a jacket that didn't belong to this decade. I went back to the door, opened it, looked into the hallway. There was a newspaper on the floor outside the room next to mine. I picked it up. I read the date. I set it back down. 32 years. That's how far back it was. I stood in the hallway for a while, not moving. I'm not the kind of person who panics easily. That's not me trying to sound tough. It's just true. Driving long haul teaches you to manage problems one at a time, or they'll pile up on you. So I stood there, and I tried to think clearly, and the clearest thought I had was that something was very, very wrong with me. And the second clearest thought was that Harlan was standing at the end of the corridor. Same suit, same face, same expression, which was no expression at all. He said, calmly and pleasantly, that I looked like I could use a little more rest. I went back into my room and locked the door. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and I waited for something to make sense. After a couple hours, I decided that sitting still wasn't helping anything. So I went out into the hallway again. Harlan was gone. I went door to door on the second floor, knocking quietly, not knowing what I expected. On the fourth door, I knocked. Someone knocked back. Her name was Delia Marsh. She opened the door on the chain first, just enough to see me, and I could tell from her face that she'd been awake for a long time. She was maybe in her late 20s, dark circles under her eyes. Her hair pulled back in a way that looked like it had started neat and gotten less neat over time. She looked at me like I was the first real thing she'd seen in days. She let me in. She told me she'd checked in what she thought was 5 or 6 days ago. She'd been a travel nurse passing through, same story as me roughly. Truck trouble was her car trouble, and the Varden was the only place to stay. She'd woken up the next morning in the past, just like I had. She'd figured it out faster than me, she said, because her phone hadn't worked, and she'd gone outside and tried to use a payphone, and the payphone had worked fine, and she'd panicked and come back in. She told me the rule. Every time you sleep inside the Varden, you go back further. She'd already been pushed back further than I had. She didn't know by how much. She'd stopped trying to count. She told me about Harlan, that he appeared in every era, the same as always at the end of the hall, always watching, that she'd tried to have a real conversation with him once, early on, and he'd been polite and patient and completely useless, speaking in that formal way of his, like he was managing a perfectly normal situation. She told me the front door was the other problem, that she'd tried to leave, had actually walked out onto the street twice, but both times something had shifted. The door had been closer than she expected when she turned around, and she'd found herself back in the lobby without understanding how, like the building had a way of folding her back inside. I asked her what she thought Harlan was. She said she didn't know exactly, but she thought he'd been doing this a long time. long enough that the hotel itself had become something it wasn't supposed to be. She used the word warped. She said she thought he needed guests the way certain things need to feed, and that the going back in time was just the mechanism. The further back you went, the harder it was to get out, until eventually there was no time left to return to. We agreed to stay awake. We tried hard. We talked, we moved around. We ran cold water from the tap and splashed our faces. I told her about my route, my truck, my apartment back home. She told me about her patients, her sister, a dog she'd had growing up, named Copper. We kept each other company, and for a while it worked. But the exhaustion that built up inside that hotel wasn't normal. I noticed it after a few hours, the way it pressed down on me from the inside, heavier than it should have been, heavier than missing a night's sleep could account for. It was like the building itself was adding weight to my eyelids. I watched Delia fighting it the same as me, her head drooping and snapping back up, her hands gripping the arms of the chair she was sitting in. She fell asleep sitting upright. One second she was awake, and the next she wasn't. I called her name. I got up and shook her shoulder. She didn't respond. Not in the way someone sleeping normally doesn't respond, but in the way someone in a very deep place doesn't respond. I let go of her shoulder. I looked away at the window for maybe 10 seconds, just trying to figure out what to do. When I looked back, she was gone. Not gone from the room, gone like she'd never been there. The chair was empty. Her few belongings that had been on the nightstand were gone. The indentation she'd left in the chair cushion was gone. Just gone. Back further into time, into a decade I hadn't reached yet. I sat in that room by myself for a long time. I fought it as long as I've ever fought anything. I paced. I hit the wall a few times just to feel something sharp. I ate a bag of chips from the vending machine even though I wasn't hungry. I kept the lights on. I kept moving. It took me down anyway. I woke up in the same room, but the room was younger. The wallpaper was different, newer looking, like it had just been hung. I went to the window. The street was further back now, much further. There was a truck parked across the road that I recognized as a model from the early 1960s. The road wasn't fully paved in some sections. There were people down there in clothing from that era going about their morning. I was more than 60 years back. Harlan was in the hallway. Same as always. Same dark suit, same combed hair, same face that didn't look like it had aged a single day from the man I'd met when I checked in. I walked straight up to him this time because I was tired of being afraid of him. I asked him what he was. He said he was the night manager, pleasant as ever. Like it was a perfectly reasonable question with a perfectly simple answer. I asked him what he wanted. He said, guests always settled in. He said it the way you'd say something you'd said 10,000 times before. Comfortable with it, patient. Like he knew how this ended regardless of what I did between now and then. That word, guests, landed wrong. It wasn't hospitality in his voice. It was something older than that. I thought about what Delia had said about feeding, and I looked at his face again, at the way it moved when he talked, just slightly slower than it should, like the expressions were being arranged rather than felt, like he'd studied how a face was supposed to work and had gotten most of it right. I asked him how long he'd been doing this. He smiled and said the hotel had always been here. I walked away from him and went back to the room and sat down and thought about everything Delia had told me. I thought about it the way I think through a bad route, looking for the piece that changes everything. She'd said the door folded her back inside when Harlan was watching. That was the piece. I thought about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, not built for speed. I thought about the way he'd been standing in the hallway both times I'd seen him, not moving toward me, just watching. I thought about the way he'd been in the lobby when I checked in, behind the desk, between me and nothing. The front door was at the end of the lobby, straight line from the stairs, maybe 40 feet. Harlan's usual spot was the far end of the second floor hallway. If I came down the stairs fast and he wasn't already in the lobby, I could cover 40 feet before he could get there. And if he couldn't get between me and the door in time, maybe the door would just be a door. It was a thin theory. It was the only one I had. I waited until the middle of the night when the hotel was completely silent. I cracked my door and listened. Nothing. I stepped out into the hallway and looked toward the far end. Empty. I went to the stairs as quietly as I could and looked down into the lobby. Harlan was there. He was standing in the center of the lobby floor, not behind the desk, not near the door, just in the middle of the room. He was facing the stairs. He was looking right at me like he'd known I was coming, and he smiled. And it was the same smile as always, and he started moving toward the staircase slowly, the way water moves when it's just starting to fill something up. I ran. I came down those stairs as fast as my legs would carry me, and I cut hard to the left toward the front door, and Harlan turned to follow, but he was slow. He was so slow, and I crossed the lobby in a few long strides and hit the door with both hands and pushed. It opened. The night air came at me like a wall, and I stumbled out onto the front steps and didn't stop. I kept going, down the steps and across the parking lot and out to the road. I ran until my lungs were burning, and I stopped and turned around. The Varden was behind me, dark and quiet. The lights that had been on were off. The flickering sign at the front was dark. The street I was standing on was my street, the one I'd driven down. The cars parked along the curb were the right ones, the modern ones. Down the road, I could see my truck sitting where I'd left it, the hood still up, where I'd left it open when I'd started walking toward the hotel, what felt like a lifetime ago. I stood there breathing hard for a long minute. Then I walked to my truck, got in, and I drove. I didn't stop for 2 states. I didn't stop at a hotel. I pulled into a rest stop when I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, and I slept in the cab with the doors locked and the engine on, and that was fine. That was enough. I tried not to think about Delia. I did anyway. I thought about her the whole drive, and I've thought about her since. I don't know what decade she's in now. I don't know how far back she's been pushed. I've thought about going to someone about it, but I can't figure out who you call for something like this, and I'm not sure it would help her even if I could. What I know is she was real, and she was trying to get out the same as me. And she didn't make it. I got home. I went back to work. I rerouted my drives so they don't go anywhere near that part of the state anymore. My dispatcher thinks it's a mileage thing. I let him think that. For a couple months, I was almost okay. Then one night, I was coming back from a run, and I stopped at a light, and I looked up at my rearview mirror, just checking traffic behind me the way you do. And in the reflection, past the back window, standing on the sidewalk at the corner I just turned from, there was a tall man in a dark suit. By the time I turned around to look, the corner was empty. I've been telling myself it was nothing. A man in a suit on a sidewalk is not a crime. It's not even unusual. And it was dark, and I was tired, and I've been jumpy ever since that night in Marin's Hollow. So I've got reasons to see things that aren't there. But the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I can't shake no matter how many reasonable explanations I line up, is something Harlan said when I asked him how long he'd been doing this. He didn't say a long time. He said the hotel had always been here, and the way he said it, so calm, so patient, like a man who has never once needed to rush because he already knows how every story he's part of ends, has been sitting in the back of my head ever since. I don't think I left Marin's Hollow that night. I think he let me go.